this CAT panel, I'm going to introduce the panelists. But before we start, this is meant to be a very interactive panel, okay? We're taking this all the way back to the basics. Simplicity, why you're going in and helping people in the most important times in their life, right? So today I'm joined by Miss Rachel Adams. She is the owner and president of Indoor Environmental Management, Inc., and she is one of my mentors as well. So please welcome Rachel. We have Ryan Geiger. He's the VP of Sales and Marketing at Vital Solutions, and he is a leader in the restoration, contracting, and chemical innovations, and he has 25 years of experience. Please welcome Ryan. Darren Hudima, he's the Director of Training and Technical Services at Puro Clean, and he is an IICRC Board of Director. And he has, I believe it's now 50 years of experience, so please welcome Darren Hudima to the stage.
You want to go in the middle? Okay.
John Reasoner, he is the Director of Catastrophe Services at Paul Davis Restoration. And he's built his career actually in the roofing space and large disaster recovery. Please welcome John Reasoner. And last but certainly not least, Barry Rice. He is the EHS Director for Signal Restoration. Please welcome Barry. So when we first met, we thought, gosh, how do we talk about this in 50 minutes, right? It was not easy, but what we did is we drove it down to 3 key categories, which are motivation, the logistics, and the health and safety portion of catastrophe response. So to start this off, I'm going to ask a question, but feel free to chime in and ask for elaboration or maybe a different direction of the question. This is meant to benefit everybody here. It's not just informational. So feel free to ask your questions. So I think one of the first things that we asked was, what drives somebody to be that shining light in somebody's darkest day? So I will let's see, Barry, take it away, and then we'll just go from there.
I think it's when you've experienced walking into a building or a situation and people are just overwhelmed with the situation. I call it the deer in the headlights look, and I'm not berating somebody when I say that. It's just the fact that it can be quite overwhelming, whether it be a residence or commercial building. It's the building manager, and then assuring that person, you know, how you can do this and how you can fix it, and then at the end of that process, you know, they are so relieved, and they can restart their business or they can re-enter their home. I think it's taking it from that initial shock and awe to, this is what we can do, believe in us, trust in us, we'll work you through this. Experiencing that's really, really rewarding.
And so with that, what we're saying is there has to be a right motivation to do it right. There has to be a why. And I think everybody's why up here varies, and I think all of your guys' whys probably vary too, right? Whether it's your local community or, you know, a lot of us pick up our operations and go to places like Florida or California with the wildfires. So the reason why we chose motivation is because you have to have a reason and a why to go into those areas that you may be gone for, what did we say, 5 weeks at a time?
Sure.
You know, it could be 5 weeks. That means no shower sometimes, no family time. I think we all have seen each other at no shower time, unfortunately. But the next part of that is we wanted to share strategy and best practices for your motivation, right? And that's why we chose the logistics and the health and safety portion of that, because it actually feeds in to your strategy. So can you share a strategy or practice that has strengthened your team's resilience in a time of crisis? Anybody? Rachel, you want to go first?
I'd say you have to be prepared before it happens. Like right now, companies that do large loss or CAT work, they're getting their pieces together, they're getting their teams together, they're getting their equipment together, they're getting all those pieces to the puzzle. They're assembling them right now. So you can't wait till the storm happens and try to, do backwards. You have to be ready and you have to be prepared. And labor is going to be one of your biggest challenges, and being able to bankroll that is going to be one of your bigger challenges. And I see a lot of companies who get in trouble because they show up and they're excited to be there. It's, it really is. It's an adrenaline rush to be a part of something like that. But they don't take into account the financial commitment that means, because you might not see money back in the door for a minimum of 30 days or longer, depending on what you're there to do. And that's for your final payment. And so you've got to be prepared to take that financial risk and that financial investment.
Yeah. I would just pile onto that a little bit. I mean, that's pretty much my entire role at Paul Davis, is making sure that people are putting plans together without the urgency, without emotion involved ahead of time, and that couples in with safety to make sure that you have a safety plan, and you have contracts and commitments lined up for labor, for lodging, for different venues and vendors, so that you're not making mistakes based on, like I said, emotions and urgency. Because too many times, the motivation for the dollar is there for companies, and all they are doing is chasing the dollar. And I've said it 100 million times, if that's why you're here, then you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail. You'll make a little bit of money, but in the end, you'll fail. The motivation has to be to serve people in their time of need and be there and be the hope for someone. And the only way you can do that correctly is to make sure that you're making a plan ahead of time for all aspects of it. And plan for Murphy, because Murphy will show up.
Absolutely. Yeah, how many in this room have responded to CAT events, whether it's hurricane or fire? Yeah. So you all know exactly what's involved when you're going into an area, especially when you've seen complete devastation, decimation of communities. And so how many have gone into an area that are outside of their normal work territory or state or things to that extent? So one of the things that we see a lot is that people don't do exactly what John mentioned, was going in and being able to prepare. You need to make sure that you've got all your things in place, because once you respond to those types of areas, you're leaving your business at home. Now, what did you build your business for? You built it to help your community. And so if you don't have anything that's in place to make sure your business continues to run at home, by the time you give back, your business could be gone. Why? Because we're out doing something else, and somebody calls in the time of need in your own community, your own city, your own town, and you're not available. So don't be chasing the money, going in somewhere and basically leave your business behind. But if you're gonna go into an area, be prepared to be there for weeks. And when you go into areas, you look along Milton and Helene's two events, now you look at California. When you get into some of those areas, I worked a number of hurricanes. Ike was one that really comes to mind, which hit Galveston and Houston, Texas. We were there 5 weeks. And essentially, the first 72 hours, you may get 48, 50 hours of sleep. Straight work without any sleep. Right? Yeah.
Actually not bad.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. But sleep. A lot of cases when you go into an area like that, you don't have accommodations. Sometimes you can be driving 2, 3, 4 hours to accommodations, and that's why a lot of people bring in RVs. But where do you park? A lot of times you have no power, you don't have fuel, you don't have things that are close by, so the logistics of responding to CAT events are pretty significant, which means you have to have a strategic plan that you're putting together and making sure that your entire team is on board, because you're leaving them home. You're leaving your families at home.
Right.
Are they prepared for that emotionally? And the prime directive of anything that we do is about health and safety. If you're not prepared for that before you leave, if you're not prepared for what you're going to encounter, and you go out and do things that you think, oh, it's not gonna happen to me. What was the guy that he just mentioned? Murphy. That's the time that you go and decide to do something that's when Murphy bites. And then you end up with illnesses, sickness, all kinds of other challenges.
Good.
Yeah. First off, I want to say I'm humbled to be on the stage with these folks because these are the true experts. I'm coming from a perspective of the do's and don'ts, the mistakes that I've seen, because mistakes, they cost you money. It all really comes down to preparation. To think that you could just load up a box truck with a team and come down into a storm event, and make $1 million or whatever you think, it's not true. It could end up, like Rachel said, crippling your business, even bankrupting it. So, I've seen a lot of good and a lot of bad, and it's all really comes down to preparation. So if you can't, you got to make sure your home base is taken care of before you think you can start, hitting the road. But there's just so much more into it than just coming into a storm and, job after job after job. It's grueling.
I'm just going to kind of dovetail on something Darren touched on, and that is the emotional part to this. Your mental health, because the stress, fatigue, because there is no sleep, there's no rest. There may be days where if you got a couple hours, you're probably pretty lucky. And just being able to find a hot meal. And you're leaving all of your support systems behind. And you've got your team, and hopefully your team can lift you up, and you guys can work together as a team. But the emotional part of that, plus just seeing the devastation of people's lives that are just obliterated. And you may deal with the homeowners that have lost it all. There's typically death that's involved, and there's just a lot of emotional health that is tied to doing this as well. And not everybody, I think, is prepared for that.
Well said.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads us into logistics, right? We chose logistics because I think, Darren, you mentioned you might park 5 miles from where you're supposed to be. You might not have fuel. You might not have electricity. You might be sleeping in the back of your truck. Might not shower. And so out of all these wonderful people up here, I think they've all faced some logistical nightmares, if you will. And I think most of you have, right? Nothing goes perfect, but I think we know that nothing goes perfect. But, what are some of the significant challenges and logistics that you guys have faced? We'll take it back down to Barry.
Fuel is a big one that I've seen either work really, really well or not work at all. The most successful ones on a larger scale, you probably deal with this, is having arrangements for fuel. And oh, by the way, if you can offer fuel to your clients who are also out of fuel, your hero status just went up here. And again, it's for the right motivation. I don't mean that in the wrong sense. If you can have that with you and offer that to people in time of need. But one of my big things from an environmental health and safety standpoint, and it comes down to the basics, is the right boots and the right socks. I say it takes, by the second or the third day, I see people starting to limp. And I can tell right away, they haven't been on their feet very much, which, trust me, I'm not the one to lecture on that. I sit way too much. But having the correct boots that aren't worn out and the correct socks. And it's very easy to tell the people that don't have that. 48 hours, 72 hours, they are limping and they are in pain.
It's not the time to break in a new pair of boots.
It's not the time to break them in. Get your good boots ahead of time and break them in and put your money into that, because you will be putting in the steps and the miles. It's incredible the amount of miles a project manager will put on in any given day.
Yeah, you can definitely judge a restoration company by the shoes from the technicians that show up.
Yeah.
They show up for a hurricane flood event in tennis shoes.
And the greatest Nikes.
White tennis shoes. Yeah.
Right.
That cost more than the good safety boots.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, gosh, logistics nightmares, they're going to happen. And, I can't stress enough to plan for those kind of things. I mean, even when I came down just recently for Milton, I was setting up into a Lowe's parking lot with our big Merv. It's a command sitter 40-foot trailer, and it's all nice and decked out. And I got set up at 10:30 at night, and it's about to go to bed and click the generator on. Generator kicks on, and for some reason the thing didn't get power. So if you knew what kind of weather we were dealing with, sleeping in an RV down in St. Petersburg was not an idea that I was going to do without air conditioning. So I slept in the back of my truck that night. And that only affected me. When you think about things like your crew's mental health and their well-being, they have to have an incredible amount of motivation, especially at the start of the event, and to keep them going. So when things happen like, generators running out, not having a clean place to stay, unable to wash their clothes, those things really, really matter. It can be something simple as you forgot to, call your credit card companies to up their limits and they're going out of towns for them to be able to get fuel, and all of a sudden they get a state away and they go fill up and now their cards don't work. It's very demoralizing. So it all goes back to that pre-planning and to plan for Murphy. You have to have contingencies in place for when things go wrong. Not if they go wrong, because they absolutely will go wrong. And whatever you do not plan for, that's what's going to happen.
I couldn't agree with you more, because having been involved significantly in large events, Barry talked about boots. One of the things that I see a lot, people love to publish pictures on social media about what they're doing. And the things that I see people posting in these types of events just make me cringe. You see guys that are dunging out the sludge from the hurricanes that have come through, and they're wearing shorts. What the hell are you doing? Because in the end, do you know what's in that sludge? It's got sewage, it's got every contaminant you can probably think of, and you're not wearing proper personal protection equipment. With Milton, there were 30 cases of the flesh-eating bacteria that affected people because they were in waters or got in contact with wet materials like the sludge, open wound, and out of that, I think 7 people died. And yet I look at our crews and they say they're professional. And what you guys post on social media, that's not professional. Especially when you're not doing the things the way OSHA wants you to do them to protect yourselves. There's suits for a reason, respirators for a reason. How many have ever heard of hurricane lung? Anybody? Hurricane lung? It's a real thing. Because when that stuff starts to dry out, and you got traffic that's going down roads and things are happening, and you see this cloud of dust that's in the air, you know exactly what that is? It's all the sewage and everything that was in that sludge that's now dried out and now has become airborne. Airborne means what? Respirable. And there's people that come out of events and they cough for months because they've got it down in their chest and your body can't process it. And people end up getting sick. So these are real things that we're talking about up here. Things that we've experienced. And we're helping you to make good decisions. And remember, there's a really good friend of mine that's in the room. What's the prime directive? Health and safety. You need to be looking out for one another. And you're going to go into events where you don't have power, you don't have climate control, and you're going to be working in buildings that are 90, 100 degrees, and the humidity is off the charts. Heat stress is a huge factor in this business, especially when you're wearing personal protection equipment. So when you're going in, you're thinking about logistics. You've got to be able to plan for those types of things. How do you create cooling chambers for your guys to come off and into to cool down after 15, 20, 30 minutes worth of work? The bigger you are, the shorter amount of time that you're going to be being able to work. And so you've got to have strategic things that are in place to plan for those types of problems.
And kind of going with what you're talking about with your people and the health and safety component, a lot of companies, they don't have the labor of people in-house to do a lot of this work, so they're relying on labor companies to provide that labor. And are you getting people that understand what we do? Do they understand the health and safety risks that they're entering into? And it becomes difficult to get quality technicians or people that you're putting in the field that follow the safety protocols and you may have the best safety programs on the planet, but to make sure everybody's following that, you need to make sure you're bringing in the right people that understand what those risks are, and your training. The safety component starts from the moment you get there. Well, actually starts before you get there, the planning, but it never ends. It has to be in front of your face the entire time you're there, and it changes. The safety hazards are continually changing.
You have to have additional supervision
Exactly.
It's extremely important that you feel responsible for those labor companies. You know, just
Yes.
because you're sourcing them out, that does not remove your responsibility to take care of their health and safety on your job site.
And that's an OSHA thing.
And that's another thing that's really important. If you're bringing in temp labor like that, we would do a color system with our shirts or hats so that we could identify who was temporary labor. We could identify who were your crew chiefs, who are your leaders by what they're wearing. And that's really, really important, because if you don't do something to color identify your crews, you start seeing them going off in other directions, doing things that's like, what the heck? You've got to have good controls in place, and we do that through color coding systems, shirts or vests, things to that extent.
When you're working with companies like what Kara Driscoll does, you know, she provides temp labor, you know, you can up front tell them what you need. I need people that are already fit tested. I need people that understand how to use a moisture meter, or whatever your needs are, so that they can pre-plan for that, and they can have those individuals already, you know, set in place, so they know what they're sending you and you know what you're getting.
I think even on like the mentality of those temp workers, right? Sometimes if they haven't seen it,
Right.
it's not just mentally exhausting, it's actually emotionally exhausting, especially depending on what you're coming and helping with, right? Like California, how do you work with somebody that completely lost everything? In Asheville, how do you work with somebody who's lost everything, but yet you're still trying to be there to help them? Temp labor might not understand that emotional side unless they've already helped in this industry before, right? Barry, did you want to add something?
I was just going to add, you talk about the cooling part of it and the hydration part of it, and what we found 3 or 4 years ago is that the electrolyte replacement powders, we like Drip Drop is one of them. We started with liquid IV, and we actually had the traveling nurses that came in and helped us during COVID, introduced us to that. And they're a game changer for not only our employees, but for the temp employees. I mean, we literally buy cases of this stuff. It's an overhead expense, but we literally buy cases of it. And I can tell you, it is the difference between if somebody is having a problem, then finishing the day healthy, or literally crashing and burning and maybe having a more severe problem. So the hydration part of it and the advent of the new electrolyte replacements is huge.
And if I can add on to that, one of the things that's really important to do is train your crews to watch out for one another. If you're not training your crews to ask on a regular basis, are you okay? If you can't see the signs of an individual that's starting to crash, if they're not sweating, if they're not urinating, if they're not doing the things that are regular to what your body is producing for fluids, I've seen individuals crash and ended up having to take somebody to an emergency and spend 6 hours as they're getting hydrated through IV fluids because they didn't say, no, I'm not feeling well. So it's important. It's okay to say, no, I'm not feeling good. Get them out. Get them unsuited. Get them hydrated. And in this particular situation, we're hydrating him, but it was coming up the other direction. It wasn't staying down. He was already beyond the point of his body processing liquids properly. So what do? We have to take him to the ER. And if you've got areas where those systems aren't working properly or facilities aren't open, you're going to have a difficult situation. So you got to train your crews to watch out for one another. I'm a proponent of at least 2-man crews working together. Because if you have somebody that's working off in an area that they have no supervision and they crash, by the time you find them, it could be too late. So always have at least 2-man crews that are working together, especially in situations where you don't have climate control and things to that extent in the buildings that you're working in.
Yeah, I mean, what both of you said is 100% true, and it also reflects on the back end of your deployment. You know, if you want to save money on not purchasing the supplies needed and the hydration and the cooling systems for your crew so that you can save money, well, you're going to burn that crew out. Hopefully you won't have any medical emergencies, but if you do, I mean, you've just shot your entire deployment. But what I have found, when you do spend the extra resources to take care of your crew, now you've got the difference of them working 3 and 4 weeks and loving what they do, as opposed to being ready to go after being on site for just a week. So it pays for itself in the end as far as financially goes, but you have a responsibility at the end of the day to take care of the people that you're in charge of, and the people that work for you. And if you've never been out there and you haven't put on those suits and dealt with 100-degree weather with 90% of humidity, you can't expect people just to go on for 16 hours a day, day after day after day, dealing with that. It is extremely important.
Yeah, and then let's talk about the aspect of mobilization, right? It's a huge part of what we do, right? But what if the roads are closed? Even if you have your chemicals, you have your PPE, you have your hydration, and all. What if that's in a truck? I mean, how do you ship stuff out? Do you have stuff locally, already supplied for you? You want to dive into that, Ryan? I know you're on that side a little bit more.
A little bit, yeah. So one story, a nightmare story I have, is in 2011, the Super Bowl was in Dallas. And I'll repeat that. Dallas was not in the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl was in Dallas.
Hey, I'm a Raider fan. The Super Bowl was at the Raiders Stadium, but they haven't been in the Super Bowl for quite some time. It's okay.
Dallas had froze over completely, and at that time they didn't have plow trucks. So it was literally like bumper cars in the highway. People were just crashing into each other. It was unbelievable. And the job site, Ground Zero, was 3 hours away. So we had to literally every morning drive 3 hours in traffic as well, and work for a few hours and then hit the road, because these people wanted to have dinner with their families still, and things like that. But that stuff you can't plan for. We were talking with John that we didn't get compensated for that windshield time either. So that's just things that pop up. Like Rachel said, things change every single day. You're faced with different challenges. And, again, imagine that for the guys, driving 3 hours, working 3 maybe, and then coming back. First off, you have to worry about them being exhausted and falling asleep at the wheel, and there's just a lot of things that go into that you just can't plan for. So that was one nightmare thing for us. I'd never forget it in my life. It was awful.
Yeah. I would say drive time is exhausting, right? Like 3 hours in the car, and you expect them to jump out of their vehicles and be
one way.
Yeah, like, hey, I'm ready to hit the ground. There's like a buffering period, right? Like, go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to say, I might recall back in Hurricane Katrina. I mean, we would spend hours just getting across the bridge.
Yep.
And then you got to work, and then you had to account for the hours it's going to take you to get back. Because if you're left behind, when curfew came, you're arrested. It's pretty simple. But I also had that opportunity to get a different perspective. I worked for Aramco for a period of time. And as a corporate account manager, when catastrophic events happen like hurricanes, they pulled everybody in. Just because you sit in an office as a corporate account manager, when your biggest accounts need supplies, you get in the car and you drive them. So having relationships with some of your suppliers to make sure you have what you need, like PPE, your chemicals, right? Everything that is going to be something that, especially consumables. Having that relationship up front and knowing that they're going to be in those areas servicing you. And sometimes we would drive and, weather all those dangerous conditions to try to get those supplies to our customers, because we know that you guys are there to serve your customers. And so that's a relationship that's important.
Yeah, 2 quick points on that. It's extremely important to have a stockpile if you're going to get into the cat world. To have a stockpile of supplies, PPE, consumables, things like that. I definitely suggest that you seal it up, hide it in a vault, put it up on a shelf, hide it from your regular mitigation crew, right? Because if they come in looking for some antimicrobial or a suit, they'll pull it from wherever they can find it. But then talk to Aramco, talk to John Don. They've both been very helpful to me about shipping stuff in areas. The second point that I want to make is I'm going to steal one of Leslie Anderson's viewpoints when it comes. She trained me in trauma, by the way. I got my certification from Leslie herself. But she said, you know, in trauma, you have to volunteer for that. That is not something you can make your employees to do. And I would highly suggest you take that same mentality for CAT work. If you have to talk one of your crew members into deploying and it's something that they really don't do it. Don't do it, because they're the ones that's not going to say anything. That is your medical risk right there. It's important that you have people on the team that is just gung-ho to do it, because it'll wear you down. It'll wear you down.
You know,
not for everybody.
you bring up a really good point, because essentially, if you're not doing briefings at the end of the day, sitting down with your teams, how did things go? What kind of risks did you encounter today? How did you deal with them? Looking at their emotional support, how are you feeling? What challenges you're dealing with? You got to be able to talk about those things, and because if you don't talk about them and you hold them in, the things that you see are pretty significant. We've seen death. We've seen just about anything that you could possibly imagine dealing with CAT work. So you've got to make sure that you got the right crew that are ready to go. But one of the challenges that you find, the longer that project or that event lasts, by the time you get into 5 weeks of being at an event, you're emotionally drained, you're physically drained, you're mentally drained, and your crews start burning out fast. And so you got to be able to prepare for those types of problems. And to talk about traffic, when I worked Hurricane Ike, we were doing a hotel in downtown Houston, 12 floors, and that was our accommodations, was the hotel that was affected. That's where we ended up staying. So we were in wet rooms, running dehumidification systems to try and dry the rooms out that we were in fact staying in.
Hopefully you get a deal on the room.
But it's really important. But then it took 4 weeks before they opened up Galveston to clear the roads enough to get people out there to be able to start doing work. The traffic, sometimes it would take 4 to 5 hours to make a 1 hour drive or so to Galveston. 4 to 5 hours you're spending on the road because all the traffic is trying to get in, all the contractors. And there goes your work day just about. Mm-hmm. And so by the time you get there and you try and do 2, 3, 4, 5 hours worth of work, sometimes you end up working 10, 9 o'clock at night just to get an 8 hour day in. And then what are you doing? Driving back in the same amount of traffic again. Mm-hmm. So those are logistics that you're going to encounter that you got to be prepared for.
Yeah, and I think the next portion that I think we really wanted to spend a lot of time on too, just the time, right? But health and safety, right? I think maintaining not just your PPE, but all of your equipment was key. And so I'm going to throw this up to Barry. You know, how do you maintain your safety through effective PPE and your equipment management? I know that's a hot topic.
Well, first, make sure you've got it dialed in before. You know, what you're doing day to day right now needs to be 90% of the practices that you are putting in place during a CAT event. So the CAT event is not the time to introduce something new. So you should understand what has already been discussed about having your PPE ready. I mean, we mobilize tractor trailers worth of PPE, and guess what? Sometimes we get one small job, and tractor trailers are demobilizing full of PPE. So that's really a big deal. Make sure you're doing and you're insisting on your job hazard analysis, okay, before you start the job. If you need to hire safety supervisors, you need to train them, do that, and have them doing that. And it's hard to keep up with, but every job. Make sure you're getting your asbestos surveys before you start tearing things out. Quick story, where the hurricanes hit this year, I live in that county. I live about 4 miles from the beach. And last week, there was a homeowners association getting a permit for rebuilding, and the county was asking them for proof of their asbestos surveys back in October, November when they were doing demo. So it 6 months later, Pinellas, 6 months later, still nailing it. Every job that we did in Pinellas was visited by their asbestos inspection unit.
Go ahead.
They were hitting us with the EPA lead crap. All right?
Okay.
And
Yeah,
they wanted,
lead paint.
one wanted asbestos on the ceiling, and I'm like, we're not taking the ceiling out.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
they would get attorneys at the condo just to shut it down long enough because they were hit with a $5,000 deductible per unit. So they're trying to drag the anchor on us getting in there.
Well, not only that, we're actually running into a lot of recon jobs out in Pinellas where someone else did the mitigation. And they're still not issuing those permits unless you can prove what was done beforehand. So, we have to come together as a group and decide that we're going to do things the right way, regardless of who you work for, regardless of who has which portion or which division of the job, to help each other out.
The problem is there's so many who aren't part of the professional organizations, and they're just running rampant and going out rip and gut, make a few bucks. And
Correct. And that always happens. All these hurricanes we
Yep.
mentioned, it's always prevalent. You will always see that. So you have to be prepared to walk into a job, assess that. I'm sure you've done it. We walked away from jobs in Pinellas. There's a saying, I heard others say it, is the best job we ever did is the job that we turned down.
Yeah.
Don't go to court.
And so, yeah, you don't go to
Alice
court.
ain't worth it.
Yeah.
So again, have those basic practices set up ahead of time and have the people prepared to distribute the PPE and monitor it and do the job hazards analysis and make sure you have your asbestos surveys and make sure you have your abatement companies ready to do the work for you. All of that.
I was going to, just to kind of dovetail on that, if you're going to be going in these states, and this is obviously not the state that you are, or that you reside in or your company resides in, make sure you have the right licensing before you get in there. But it's the asbestos license, and remember asbestos licensing in every state. Florida's mold licensing, Louisiana's mold licensing, and Texas is mold licensing. But also remember, asbestos licensing in every state is very different, and you may have different regulations from not just from a state perspective, but from a city. So, for example, New York State is very different from New York City. So you got to make sure you understand where you're working and what those regulations are. And I always believe having a health and safety person that is delegated to that that's all they're there to do. And you may have more than one depending on the size of the job. That is their role.
Yeah, and it's also important that even if you are responding in from another state, Florida's very good about, removing those policies about traveling offices. But just because a regulation or some sort of licensing has been waived in order to handle emergencies does not waive you from doing the right thing, regardless of what
Or
it is.
liability.
Yep. And that's one of the other things, depending on where you're traveling to. We just had the recent fires in California. If you go into California, the laws are pretty strict when it comes to general contracting. You remove any materials, you need a general contractor's license. So you might go into a state and assume that, well, where you come from, we don't need a general contractor's license to go and tear out drywall. But other states, you do. And so if you go into those areas and you're not doing things according to the jurisdiction that you're in, you could be in serious trouble, and the fines can be significant, and they will prevent you from coming back.
There are 61 subcategories underneath general contracting licenses in California. 61. You need a special licenses. You need a special license in order to pressure wash a house. And you have to collect the water, by the way. You have to dam up
Reclaim.
ends. You have
Reclaim.
to collect the water, yes.
They don't want it going down the drains, so if you're doing anything,
Yes.
you've got to reclaim.
Yes. So it is extremely important that you understand the local laws, and as mentioned here, it can be a state law, a county law, a city law, all the way down to a local municipality. It's extremely important that you do your due diligence and understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So everything you guys are saying has a dollar sign attached to it. I don't
Yes,
know if
it
anybody
does.
caught this. And when we had our wildfire event in Lahaina, my phone was ringing off the hook. Like, to the industry's credit, everybody wanted to help. And I probably talked more people out of showing up to help my community based on everything you're saying, right? So through the lens of capital outlay, right? Like I always looked at events and I would be like, it's going to take us 6 figures to respond, or it's going to take us $250,000, or it's going to take us 50 grand based on location, based on this, based on that, based on, licensing, all those types of things. How do you think through that? Because this is the thing I'm trying to solve in my head is like, there's so many barriers to responding to cat work, but us as restorers, like, we have amazing hearts and all we want to do is show up and help. And we hear all the horror stories of everybody showing up with the right intention to do the right things and getting bit in the ass by it.
Yep.
So, like, how do you guys think through the math of the cost of mobilization?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. So whatever you think you need, triple it.
Yep.
And then have
It's
a
true.
line of credit just in case past that. No, to do things the right way, like the planning stage, there's formulas that I use, a little proprietary, but there is formulas that you need to come up with for, secondary issues. You need to have the capital and the available capital and the working capital to be able to get these jobs done. Too often I see people respond and they take on too much.
Mm-hmm.
They take on more than their crew can handle, or they're so happy that they lock down this large commercial job whatever it is.
Those are our best jobs. Taking those over.
Yeah,
literally.
for sure.
Go ahead,
But those cost people their businesses because they get in too deep. It is important to understand where your business is. If you are there to do $5,000 to $10,000 cut and gut or just mitigation flood jobs, then stay in your lane. The second that you jump out, you're going to cost yourself.
Before we go to that, let me add something that's really important. You need to have good contracts. Work authorizations are not contracts.
Right.
You got to have a good, solid contract, and depending on the size of the job that you guys are deciding to take on, I don't know how many of you do commercial work. We've done millions of dollars on as far as projects are concerned, and part of our contract is when we start a contract, we're not afraid. We want $250,000 up front. We want another $250,000 when we get to this next stage. We want another $250,000 when we are not banks. And so when you're working on these jobs, you've got to make sure your contracts are written in a way that you are going to get paid through those stages. And if they don't, you stop work.
Do any of you have like a minimum cost of capitalization? Like set a ground floor, because I think that's helpful.
Yeah, so I can give you those numbers. So basically, I would say that you would need at least a 40% number for your yearly revenue amount that you are able to set up as a separate CAT availability to use.
Here's a good
working
example.
Capital for that.
There was a project we took on in California, and we get this phone call. And we're a water damage company, and the receptionist she says, "I got the weirdest call this morning." I says, "Oh yeah, what was it?" She says, the college asked if we clean up sand." And I was like, "What, sand?" And then I tell her, "Well, what did you tell him?" I says, "No, we're a water damage company." I says, how did he call us?" "Well, we did a water damage out at the college." So I said, "Did you at least get his number?" And so I called him back and says, "Have you got anybody?" He says, "I've already made 3 calls." He says, "And you're the first one to call me back." So answer your phones is really important. But where I'm going with this is, when we got to the college, they had one of those high boosters that went through. And the entire building, all the buildings were covered in sand. We were taking out 2 pounds of sand out of the ceiling tiles. We put 250 people on that job, plus the project managers to run 250. So just in labor was over $300,000 for a week's worth of work. We had to get the college open in 7 days. So that's the other factor that you got to consider, is what's the time frame they're giving you to work with, and you've got to. And at the end, we're bringing in temp labor. You think they're going to wait for their money? $280,000 just in temp, and plus all your other guys that are running your crews are $300,000 plus just on $1 million job, just like that. So you've got to have good lines of credit in place. You can't be going to your bank and saying, I'm going to need a line of credit. Oh, he says, oh yeah, we'll give you $50,000. That ain't happening. And that's not going to run a job.
Just real quick, we have 10 minutes left, so we'll run questions from now on. Go ahead.
I was just going to touch back. I think I always tell everybody there's the United States and then there's California. I'm pretty sure they got about 60,000 regulations on the books, and you're right, you got to have permits for permits out there. The other thing is just like when you're into these incident areas, ongoing safety hazards, ongoing weather issues. We've seen trees coming down days later, power lines getting hit, houses that are unstable. We turned the corner one day to go into an area to do some projects, and right in front of us, the water, 3 days after the incident, flooded over the top of the road we were trying to cross. So you can get stuck on the other side of that or on this side of it. Fortunately, there was a county dump truck. He just turned and went like that and shut the road off. But 2 minutes later, we'd have been on the other side of that stuck.
Yeah.
First off, I want to say great points. It's hard to cover everything that everyone needs to know. We would need 3 more weeks to cover it all.
There's a part 2 coming.
Anthony left.
4 parts. We don't know yet.
So to Anthony's point, there's never been a time where just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think we've all been called by a contractor that's over their head and say you probably should have stayed home. I mean, we love the entrepreneur spirit. But this is the major leagues. And then the last thing I would say, when people say, how do I get started? I would recommend partnering, teaming up with someone, and go be a student first.
That's what I was going to say.
And know what you're dealing with before you. It's so much easier when you, because we've got 143 years of experience here. We're going to see something next year that we haven't seen. And you've got to build scar tissue for that. So, I mean, again, great session.
Yeah, if I can speak to that for a second, because that's one of the things that when I came in as the director of training for PureClean, a lot of our franchises to begin with were the chuck in the truck type franchises. Well, we've changed that culture. We're now getting into small commercial. We're getting into large loss, commercial property work as well. We've put an extensive training program together just related to large loss. And we actually take our guys out there in the field. For example, we go to, during one of our days, we went to where the Florida Panthers play. And we looked at that entire building from top to bottom. Boiler room to the drying room that was at the top. Look at all the logistics. Look at all the things that they're going to encounter. How do you deal with these challenges? Where do you get temporary power if they got to keep something that's open? All those types of things. You need to get training. And there's not a lot of classes that are available in this marketplace currently that are related to commercial training. But if you've never gone through commercial training, you should, because it'll improve your business even if you're in residential. The tools and things that you're given in those types of classes with experience are beyond anything that you can imagine to help prepare for these types of events.
Yeah. Two things to add on to that. Even though I did say stay in your lane, and that is extremely important, but don't be afraid to reach out for help. Build a relationship with somebody else. It's going to work out. Don't just throw your hands up and run away. Build a relationship with somebody else. If it's not internally with your own company, reach out to somebody that you know and trust and build that relationship.
Drop the ego.
Drop it. You cannot have it during a CAT event. And the second thing that I have is we do something very similar internally. We have the opportunity for an inexperienced office just to ride around with an experienced office during CAT to see what it's like. And I do that with owners and GMs as well, because sometimes they just want to know, and they go ride around for a couple of days and they go, yeah, this is not for me, I'm out. And that's the best decision that they can make, is decide not to do it.
Sometimes it's okay to say no.
It is absolutely okay.
Good from afar, but far from good.
Yes.
Yeah, hey guys, I guess I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but having responded to a lot of CATs in my life, and I'm thinking, you guys say 5 weeks. I've never been on a CAT that was 5 weeks. 2 months in Houston after Harvey, 13 months in
Yep.
Kissimmee after Irma. I mean, like, so if you think about the resources that are needed, and yeah, I'm on the labor side of things. I'm running payrolls that are hundreds of thousands of dollars a week, and that's just labor. What happens when you have to add in hotels? And hotels, you're putting that credit card down up front to reserve. I mean, for me, it could be hundreds of rooms, right? But like the capital that has to go in,
Dinner.
and I'm just one little supply, I'm not little, but one supplier of the pie, right? And then you mentioned the fuel expense and the feeding the people.
Right.
I mean, and you know,
The per diems.
I came, per diems, yeah, you know, I mean, I came from the largest disaster response company, and so to watch the effort of mobilization,
Yeah.
I think you've got to be a master of mobilization to make sure that everybody's safe. It, you know, the players are there, but, you know, I can't agree with you more that Murphy is going to show up. And like, you only get that, unfortunately, from some rough experiences, from learning from those.
Yep.
But what a great suggestion, you know, go run with some other people. Everybody needs labor. So go run with another company and learn and watch and see how it's done before you make that big decision.
If I can make a comment to what Kara, and there's a couple of others that have said this a few times now, credit cards. You can't rely on credit cards.
Nope.
When you have an area that has gone down and the systems are down, the ATMs are down, cash is king. And if you don't have enough cash on you to take care of logistics for 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks before systems come back, the only way you're paying for things typically is going to be cash in a particular area.
We didn't
and-
give our
and-
guys per diems that were cash.
Yeah.
So they could have a meal.
Yep.
We're ready for not having communications and internet. We're in an internet-dependent world.
Yeah.
You know how bad when that's your only means of communication?
Yep.
I know, Michael, we were driving over to Destin just to get AT&T to work.
One of the best, yeah, and that's the thing. And that's one of the best things that AT&T ever did was come in with these portable drone systems to bring up temporary communication systems. But to another point there, I know we've got a comment here. Just another point to that is that when you're looking at those types of things, that you have a camp. If you're going to have a few teams that are in areas, have camps. There's security in numbers. But you also need to consider sometimes hiring security.
Absolutely.
And the reason why, there are people that are going to be looting and they're going to be looking for the stuff that they know you guys got the resources for. And so security is really, really important, especially at night, to protect your crews, your vehicles, your equipment, your stuff. All right?
Generators have multiple legs during a catastrophe event.
So great information from the panel. I think the 5 of you should get together and brainstorm and write multiple articles for R&R on just this subject. Because, like you said, there's so many companies out there that say, yeah, I'm going to run and do this, and then they lose everything.
They do.
Yeah.
They need to know what they're coming into. And one, going back to what you said about having an ironclad contract, make sure you have an attorney in each state check that contract
Yep.
because the laws are different.
Yep.
They are.
In every state, like
Yep.
Florida, we do not have an AOB. You cannot have an AOB in the
Yep.
state of Florida.
Correct.
Work authorizations are moot in California, by the way. It does not give you authorization for nothing.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. But if you want to snag them, you can. They're great. I love them to pieces. And to your point, Lisa, we're actually going to in June. We're going to have another series with the panel. And maybe there will be some more written pieces. But that concludes the panel, and the expo hall is now open.
Thanks for
Thank you all.
attending, everyone.
Appreciate it.